During the Second World War, the North African Campaign took place in North Africa from June 10, 1940 to May 13, 1943. It included campaigns fought in the Libyan and Egyptian deserts and in Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia. The campaign was fought between the Allies and Axis powers, many of whom had colonial interests in Africa dating from the late 19th century. The Allied war effort was dominated by the British Commonwealth and exiles from German-occupied Europe. The United States entered the war in 1941 and began direct military assistance in North Africa on May 11, 1942. Fighting in North Africa started with the Italian declaration of war on June 10, 1940. On June 14, the British Army's 11th Hussars crossed the border from Egypt into Libya and captured the Italian Fort Capuzzo. This was followed by an Italian counter-offensive into Egypt and the capture of Sidi Barrani in September 1940 and then in December 1940 by a Commonwealth counter-offensive, Operation Compass. During Operation Compass, the Italian 10th Army was destroyed and the German Afrika Korps commanded by Erwin Rommel was dispatched to North Africa during Operation Sonnenblume to reinforce Italian forces in order to prevent a complete Axis defeat. A seesaw series of battles for control of Libya and parts of Egypt followed, reaching a climax in the Second Battle of El Alamein when British Commonwealth forces under the command of Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery delivered a decisive defeat to the Axis forces and pushed them back to Tunisia. After the late 1942 Allied Operation Torch landings in northwest Africa, and subsequent battles against Vichy France forces, the Allies finally encircled Axis forces in northern Tunisia and forced their surrender. Operation Torch in November 1942 was a compromise operation that met the British objective of securing victory in North Africa while allowing American armed forces the opportunity to engage in the fight against Nazi Germany on a limited scale. In addition, as Joseph Stalin had long been demanding a second front be opened to engage the Wehrmacht and relieve pressure on the Soviet armies, it provided some degree of relief for the Eastern Front by diverting Axis forces to the African theatre, tying them up and destroying them there. Information gleaned via British ultra-code-breaking intelligence proved critical to Allied success in North Africa. Victory for the Allies in this campaign immediately led to the Italian Campaign, which culminated in the downfall of the fascist government in Italy and the elimination of a German ally. Western Desert Campaign. On May 10, 1940, the Wehrmacht had started the Westfeldzug. 1 month later, it was plain to see that France would have to surrender within 2 weeks. On June 10, 1940, the Kingdom of Italy aligned itself with Nazi Germany and declared war upon France and the United Kingdom. British forces based in Egypt were ordered to undertake defensive measures, but to act as non-provocative as possible. However, on June 11 they began a series of raids against Italian positions in Libya. Following the defeat of France on June 25, Italian forces in Tripolitania facing French troops based in Tunisia redeployed to Cyrenaica to reinforce the Italian 10th Army. This, coupled with the steadily degrading equipment of the British forces led General Archibald Avile to order an end to raiding and placed the defence of the Egyptian border to a small screening force. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini ordered that the 10th Army was to invade Egypt by August 8. 2 days later, no invasion having been launched, Mussolini ordered Marshal Graziani that the moment German forces launched Operation Sea Lion, he was to attack. On September 8, the Italianza hampered by the lack of transport and enfeebled by the low level of training among officers and weakened by the state of his supporting arms were ordered to invade Egypt the following day. The battle plan was to advance along the coastal road while limited armored forces operated on the desert flank. To counter the Italian advance, Avile ordered his screening forces to harass the advancing Italians, falling back towards Mersa-Matruh, where the main British infantry force was based. Positioned on the desert flank was the 7th Armoured Division, which would strike into the flank of the Italian force. By September 16, the Italian force had advanced to Makhtala, around 80 mi west of Mersa-Matruh, where they halted due to supply problems. Despite Mussolini urging for the advance to carry on, Graziani ordered his force to dig in around Sidi Barrani, and fortified camps were established in fort locations. Additional troops were also positioned behind the main force. In response to the dispersed Italian camps, the British planned a limited 5-day attack, Operation Compass, to strike at the fortified camps one by one. The British Commonwealth force, totaling 36,000 men, attacked the forward elements of the 10-division-strong Italian army on December 9. Following the initial success, the forces of Operation Compass pursued the retreating Italian forces. In January, the small port at Bardia was taken, soon followed by the seizure of the fortified port of Tobruk. Some 40,000 Italians were captured in and around the two ports, with the remainder of the 10th Army retreating along the coast road back to El Aila. Richard O'Connor sent the 7th Armoured Division across the desert, with a small reconnaissance group reaching Bida Fom some 90 minutes before the Italians, cutting off their retreat. Though desperate attempts were made to overcome the British forces at the Battle of Bida Fom, the Italians were unable to achieve a breakthrough, and the remnants of the retreating army surrendered. Thus, over the course of 10 weeks Allied forces had destroyed the Italian 10th Army and reached El Aila, taking 130,000 prisoners of war in the process. Mussolini requested help from their German ally, and the Italian Comando Supremo sent motorized and armored forces to protect their colonies in North Africa. The Germans hastily put together a motorized force, whose lead elements arrived in Tripoli in February. The force, termed the Afrika Korps by Hitler, was placed under the command of Erwin Rommel. His orders were to reinforce their Italian allies and block Allied attempts to drive the Italians out of the region. The forward Allied force now named 13 Corps adopted a defensive posture and over the coming months was built up before having most of its veteran forces redeployed to Greece. In addition, the 7th Armoured Division was withdrawn to the Nile Delta. The veteran forces were replaced with inexperienced forces, ill-equipped to face German armor. Although Rommel had been ordered to simply hold the line, an armored reconnaissance soon became a fully-fledged offensive from El Aila in March 1941. In March-April, the Allied forces were forced back and leading general officers captured. The Australian 9th Infantry Division fell back to the fortress port of Tobruk, and the remaining British and Commonwealth forces withdrew a further 100 mi east to the Libyan and Egyptian border. With Tobruk under siege from the main German-Italian force, a small battalion group continued to press eastwards. Capturing Fort Capuzzo and Bardia in passing, it then advanced into Egypt, and by the end of April had taken Sollum and the tactically important Hafaya Pass. Rommel garrisoned these positions, reinforcing the battle group and ordering it onto the defensive. Though isolated by land, Tobruk's garrison continued to receive supplies and replacements, ferried to Tobruk by the Royal Navy at night. Rommel's forces did not have the strength or training to take the fortress. This created a supply problem for his forward units. His front-line positions at Sollum were at the end of an extended supply chain that stretched back to Tripoli and had to bypass the coast road at Tobruk. Further, he was constantly threatened by a breakout of the British forces at Tobruk. Without Tobruk, further advances into Egypt were impractical. The Allied forces soon launched a small-scale counterattack, called Operation Brevity. This was an attempt to push the Axis forces off the key passes at the border, which gained some initial success but the advanced position could not be held. Brevity was then followed up by a much larger-scale offensive, Operation Batleaks. Intended to relieve the siege at Tobruk, this operation also failed. Following the failure of Operation Batleaks, Archibald Avile was relieved of command and replaced by Claude Auchinleck. The Western Desert Force was reinforced with the 2nd Corps, the XXX Corps, with the 2 Corps forming the 8th Army. 8th Army was made up of army forces from the Commonwealth nations, including the British Army, the Australian Army, the British Indian Army, the New Zealand Army, the South African Army, and the Sudan Defence Force. There was also a brigade of Free French under Marie-Pierre Koenig. The new formation launched a new offensive, Operation Crusader, in November 1941. After a seesaw battle, the garrison at Tobruk was relieved and the Axis forces had been forced to fall back. By January 1942 the front line was again at El Aila. After receiving supplies and reinforcements from Tripoli, the Axis again attacked, defeating the Allies at the Gazala in June and capturing Tobruk. The Axis forces drove the 8th Army back over the Egyptian border, where their advance was stopped in July. Only 90 Army from Alexandria in the First Battle of El Alamein. General Claude Auchinleck, who had personally assumed command of the 8th Army following the defeat at Gazala, was sacked following the First Battle of El Alamein and was replaced by General Harold Alexander. Lieutenant General William Gott was initially given command of the 8th Army but was killed en route to take up his command. He was replaced by Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery would ultimately take command of the 8th for the remainder of the Desert War. The Axis forces made a new attempt to break through to Cairo at the end of June at Umm Hafa but were pushed back. After a period of build-up and training, the 8th launched a major offensive, decisively defeating the German-Italian army during the Second Battle of El Alamein, in late October 1942. The 8th Army then pushed the Axis forces westward, capturing Tripoli in mid-January 1943. By February, 8th Army was facing the German-Italian Panzer Army near the Mareth Line and came under command of General Harold Alexander's 18th Army Group for the concluding phase of the war in North Africa, the Tunisia Campaign. Operation Torch. Operation Torch started on November 8, 1942, and finished on November 11. In an attempt to pincer German and Italian forces, Allied forces landed in Vichy-held French North Africa under the assumption that there would be little to no resistance. Nevertheless, Vichy French forces put up a strong and bloody resistance to Allied forces in Iran and Morocco, but not in Algiers, where a coup d'état by the French resistance on November 8 succeeded in neutralizing the French 19 Corps before the landing and arresting the Vichy commanders. Consequently, the landings met no practical opposition in Algiers, and the city was captured on the first day along with the entire Vichy African command. After 3 days of talks and threats, Generals Mark Clark and Dwight Eisenhower compelled the Vichy Admiral Francois Section-Noir Darlan to order the cessation of armed resistance in Iran and Morocco by French forces on 10 November 11 with the proviso that Darlan would be head of a Free French administration. During Operation Torch, American, Vichy French and German Navy vessels fought the naval Battle of Casablanca, ending in a decisive American victory. The Allied landings prompted the Axis occupation of Vichy France. In addition, the French fleet was captured at Toulon by the Italians, something which did them little good as the main portion of the fleet had been scuttled to prevent their use by the Axis. The Vichy army in North Africa joined the Allies. Tunisian Campaign. Following the Operation Torch landings, the Germans and Italians initiated a build-up of troops in Tunisia to fill the vacuum left by Vichy troops which had withdrawn. During this period of weakness, the Allies decided against a rapid advance into Tunisia while they wrestled with the Vichy authorities. Many of the Allied soldiers were tied up in garrison duties because of the uncertain status and intentions of the Vichy forces. By mid-November, the Allies were able to advance into Tunisia but only in single-division strength. By early December, the Eastern Task Force Euro, which had been redesignated British First Army under Lieutenant General Kenneth Andersoni Euro, was composed of British 78th Infantry Division, 6th Armoured Division, 1st Parachute Brigade, 6th Commando and elements of U.S. 1st Armoured Division. But by this time, 1 German and 5 Italian divisions had been shipped from Europe, and the remoteness of Allied airfields from the front line gave the Axis clear air superiority over the battlefield. The Allies were halted and pushed back, having advanced eastwards to within 30 km of Tunis. During the winter, there followed a period of stalemate during which time both sides continued to build up their forces. By the new year, the British First Army had 1 British, 1 US and 1 French corps. In the second half of February, in eastern Tunisia, Rommel and von Arnim had some successes against the mainly inexperienced French and U.S. corps, most notably in routing the U.S. II Corps commanded by Major General Lloyd Fredendall at the Battle of the Kasserine Pass. By the beginning of March, the 8th Army Euro advancing westward along the North African coast Euro had reached the Tunisian border. Rommel and von Arnim found themselves in an Allied two-army pincer. They were outflanked, outmanned and outgunned. the British Eighth Army bypassed the Axis defence on the Mareth line in late March, and First Army in central Tunisia launched their main offensive in mid-April to squeeze the Axis forces until their resistance in Africa collapsed. The Axis forces surrendered on May 13, 1943, yielding over 275,000 prisoners of war. This huge loss of experienced troops greatly reduced the military capacity of the Axis powers, although the largest percentage of Axis troops escaped Tunisia. This defeat in Africa led to all Italian colonies in Africa being captured. Intelligence, Axis. The Axis had considerable success in intelligence gathering through radio communication intercepts and monitoring unit radio traffic. The most important success came through Colonel Bonner Fellers, the U.S. military attaché copyright in Egypt. He had been tasked by General George Marshall to provide detailed reports on the military situation in Africa. Fellers talked with British military and civilian headquarters personnel, read documents and visited the battlefront. Known to the Germans as Die Gute Quelle, or more jokingly as the Little Fellow, he transmitted his reports back to Washington using the Black Code of the U.S. State Department. In September 1941, the Italians had stolen a code book, photographed it and returned it to the U.S. Embassy in Rome. The Italians shared parts of their intercepts with their German allies. In addition, the Shafriati alum was soon able to break the code. Fellers' reports were excessively detailed and played a significant role in informing the Germans of Allied strength and intentions. In addition, the Afrika Korps had the intelligence services of the 621st Signals Battalion Mobile Monitoring Element commanded by Hauptmann Alfred Sieber paragraph HM. The 621st Signals Battalion monitored radio communications among British units. Unfortunately for the Allies, the British not only failed to change their codes with any frequency, they were also prone to poor radio discipline in combat. Their officers made frequent open, uncoded transmissions to their commands, allowing the Germans to more easily identify British units and deployments. The situation changed after a counterattack during the Battle of Gazala resulted in the 621st Signals Battalion being overrun and destroyed, and a number of their documents captured, alerting British intelligence to the problem. The British responded by instituting an improved call signal procedure, introducing radio-telephonic codes, imposing rigid wireless silence on reserve formations, padding out real messages with dummy traffic, tightening up on their radio discipline in combat and creating an entire fake signals network in the southern sector. Allies. Allied codebreakers read much enciphered German message traffic, especially that encrypted with the Enigma machine. The Allies' Ultra program was initially of limited value, as it took too long to get the information to the commanders in the field, and at times provided information that was less than helpful. In terms of anticipating the next move the Germans would make, reliance on Ultra sometimes backfired. Part of the reason the initial German attacks in March 1941 were so successful was that Ultra intercepts had informed Naval that OKW had clearly directed Rommel not to take any offensive action, but to wait until he was further reinforced with the 15th Panzer Division in May. Rommel received this information, but placed more value on his own assessment of the situation. Trusting that the Germans had no intention of taking major actions, the British command did not respond until it was too late. Furthermore, Rommel did not generally provide OKW or the Italian Comando Supremo details of his planned operations, for he thought the Italians too prone to leak the information. Thus on January 21, 1942, when Rommel struck out on his second offensive from El Ala, Commando Supremo was just as surprised to learn of it as the British were. Ultra intercepts provided the British with such information as the name of the new German commander, his time of arrival, and the numbers and condition of the Axis forces, but they might not correctly reveal Rommel's intentions. The primary benefit of Ultra intercepts to the effort in North Africa was to aid in cutting the Axis supply line to Tunisia. Ultra intercepts provided valuable information about the times and routes of Axis supply shipments across the Mediterranean. This was critical in providing the British with the opportunity to intercept and destroy them. During the time when Malta was under heavy air attack, the ability to act on this information was limited, but as Allied air and naval strength improved, The information became instrumental to Allied success. It is estimated that 40% to 60% of Axis supply shipping was located and destroyed due to decrypted information. Heavy losses of German paratroopers in Crete, made possible by ultra-warnings of the drop times and locations, meant that Hitler hesitated to attack Malta, which aided the British in gaining control of the Mediterranean, as did the defeat of the Italian Navy at the Battle of Cape Matapan. To conceal the fact that German coded messages were being read, a fact critical to the overall Allied war effort, British command required a flyover mission be flown before a convoy could be attacked in order to give the appearance that a reconnaissance flight had discovered the target. Aftermath. After victory by the Allies in the North African Campaign, the stage was set for the Italian campaign to begin. The invasion of Sicily followed 2 months later. See also: List of World War II battles, North African Campaign timeline, Timeline of World War II in 1940-1941-1942-1943. Notes, footnotes. Citations. References: Atkinson, Rick, 2002. An Army at Dawn, The War in North Africa, 1942-1943. Abacus. ISBN A0-349-11636-9. Barclay, Brigadier C.N. Mediterranean Operations. GI Euro World War II Commemoration. Archived from the original on January 21, 1997. Retrieved 082010, Bauer, Eddie, 1984. The History of World War II. Great Britain, Silverdale. ISBN A978-1-85605-552-9. Carroll, Paul. La Volpe del Deserto. 1941 Euro 1943, La Armée Italo-Tedesche in Africa Septentrionale, The Wolves of the Desert. 1941 Euro 1943, The Italo-German Armies in North Africa. New York, Bantimer, Gents, Thomas L. Tank Combat in North Africa, The Opening Rounds, Operations Sonnenblume, Brevity, Scorpion and Bat Leaks, February 1941 Euro June 1941. Schiffer Publishing Limited. ISBN A0-7643-0226-4. Keegan, John. Oxford Companion to World War II. Oxford University Press. ISBN A0-19-280666-1. Lewin, Ronald, 1968. Rommel as Military Commander. New York, B&N Books. ISBN A978-0-7607-0861-3. Playfair, Major General ISO. And Molyneux, Brigadier CJC. With Flynn R.N., Captain F.C. and Gleave, Group Captain T.P., 1st Pub. HMSO 1966. Butler, J.R.M., ed. The Mediterranean and Middle East, Volume 4, The Destruction of the Axis Forces in Africa. History of the Second World War United Kingdom Military Series. Uckfield, UK, Naval and Military Press. ISBN A1-84574-068-8. Wilmot, H.P. June, 1944 inches Blandford Press. ISBN 0-7137-1446-8. Zabecki, David T. North Africa. The War. PBS. Retrieved 082010. External links. The Jews of North Africa and the Holocaust. An e-newsletter for Holocaust educators by Yad Vashem, BBC's flash video of the North African Campaign, timeline of the North African Campaign, general sites on the North African Campaign, Spartacus educational website, Desert War, John, Paul. World War II Study, a Euro Case Study. North Africa. Zabecki, David T. Battlefield North Africa, Rommel's Rise and Fall. Military.com. World War II. Canadian World War II online newspaper archives. Euro the North African Campaigns, 1940 Euro 1943, Redoubt Fortress Museum, home of General Hans Jar 1/4 Gen von Arnim's staff car, Eastbourne Redoubt, The Royal Sussex Regimental Association, afrikacorps.org/ AANA Research Group, North African Campaign Desertwar.net